Producing a compelling storytelling video to showcase our song Big Water was a big project in its own right, but the lyrics are the script, so that's one job that's already done. There are many components that make up a video like this one, and in my case those components have been gathered over a period of years and months. They weren't all specifically acquired for this project. I've got video of birds in there which I've taken over the years, environmental sound recordings, bird calls. So a lot of that stuff I already had in the bank, so to speak. Some of the bird videos that I have acquired were made in Port Macquarie, but they are species which are also found in the Inverell district.
Platypus pools, green fish and cliffs, beneath the brothers and the falcon's nest. Lifeblood.
The first few lines of the song conjure up some wonderful imagery, and I needed some video imagery to go with that. I didn't have any decent footage of platypus, but I acquired some with the help of a friend. I also needed to have some drone footage. I didn't have a drone, so I borrowed a drone from a photographer friend, Mike Kane, for a weekend, and I took that up to the Inverell district. In return, I loaned Mike my long telephoto lens, and he took that to Canberra for the weekend, and his mission was to get some footage and photographs of platypus. So it all worked out very well in the end. Mike came back with a little bit of footage that I was able to use in the video, and I returned his drone safely to him, despite it having generated some moments of high anxiety for me while I was using it. I was fearful that I'd crash it or drop it into the river, but it turned out okay in the end. The peregrine falcon is a bird that I've admired my whole life, and I've adopted it as my totem. And I have a friend, Paul Mander, and he's a licensed raptor keeper. Paul has several peregrine falcons, and the one that features in our video is named Neon. And I was able to get some footage of Neon a few years ago when I visited Paul to see his wonderful birds. One of the great helps in the video was to have the opportunity to talk to Ray Mepham about his life and to gather various anecdotes from him, some of which I've been able to weave into the lyrics of the song, and some of which appear in the music video. And I recorded these on a couple of occasions while I was out at Ray's farm, and just asked Ray about his life and specifically about the floods. Ray keeps a comprehensive scrapbook of newspaper clippings of the floods in Inverell over the years, so it was great to have access to that so I could get photographs of Inverell Times newspaper clippings. Ray was able to recount some stories from his old rabbit trapping days. It was wonderful to have the opportunity to include Ray's grandson Daniel in the video, and Daniel plays the part of the young rabbit trapper Ray Mepham. One of Ray's anecdotes about the floods was that of an RAAF bomber flying up the river from Inverell and over his property during the 1955 floods. Well, this proved to be a bit of a challenge. How was I going to simulate an RAAF bomber flying over Ray's property? Well, Dr. Google came to the rescue, and on YouTube I found some wonderful clips of World War II Lancaster bombers flying at air shows in the UK. One of the clips I used was made by Andrew Lloyd Aviation Films, and another by a gentleman who goes by the handle Bob Sir Granny on YouTube. And I was very fortunate to obtain permission from these two people to use footage of their Lancaster bombers. The bomber that flew over Ray's place in 1955 was actually an RAAF Lincoln bomber, which was a post-World War II variant of the Lancaster. So the footage in the video is authentic to the extent that it represents the same shape and style of aircraft as the one that Ray saw in 1955. I used a well-known movie-making trick called green screen filming. Using this technique, you film a subject against a green or a blue background, and during post-production you can key out that green or blue background and have the subject superimposed against some other background of your choosing. I used this technique to video Dylan playing his guitars, and I also used the technique to get some video of Ray on his farm, reenacting all these years later the time when he saw the RAAF bomber fly over his property. And I remember one particular afternoon we were out at Paradise Creek Station, and I had another Inverell friend with me, Jim Schliebs, and I knew that I needed some footage of the Paradise Creek Station mailbox blowing in the wind. So Jim was the grip for this production on that occasion, and Jim held the green screen behind the mailbox. Over the years I've created a few time-lapse videos of fierce storms around Port Macquarie, thunder and lightning, and also some time-lapses of clouds racing past a landscape. Some of those I obtained at Inverell. In the video you'll see a time-lapse sequence where the Inverell Courthouse features with clouds moving behind it. The subject of our song is floods, so that's one of those powerful natural events that requires some powerful imagery. And doing my research on Dr. Google, I found that the 1976 flood was the fallout from a cyclone that had crossed the North Queensland coast about 10 days before. So I thought, I don't have any footage of a cyclone, how am I going to do this? So that occupied me for quite a while to create an animation of a cyclone crossing the map of Australia and petering out in the Northern Territory and eventually degrading into an intense low pressure system and coming back down across Australia and over Inverell. Another challenge I faced making this video was, how do you get really good footage of a flood in the middle of the worst drought in living memory? Well, I used a technique that I first saw as a young boy watching cowboy and Indian films at the movies at the Capitol Theatre in Inverell. In those days, if the movie makers wanted to show a night scene, they would film it during daylight and then darken it and put a blue tint over it to simulate moonlight. So I did a similar thing. In 2018, there was a decent rain event around Port Macquarie which caused a good fresh to come down the Hastings River. So one day I went out to Beechwood and I shot some GoPro footage of the river racing over the rapids. And I shot the GoPro footage at 120 frames per second with the intention that when I put that footage into the big water video, I could slow it down to 25 frames a second to make it look like slow motion. And the act of making it look like slow motion also makes it look like a much larger flood event. Then I put it into the video, I darkened it and added a blue tint, and Bob's your uncle. I had a nighttime flood racing past Ray's property at Little Valley. Back in the 1980s and early 90s, like many people, I was attracted to the idea of doing home videos. And during the 1991 flood at Inverell, which is the last major flood that has come down the Macintyre, I shot some video on a handycam of the floods going past the area where we lived at Elsmore, the water going over the spillway at Lake Inverell, and it wasn't until last year, 2018, that Ruby unearthed that old videotape in our garage, and we took it to a person in Port Macquarie who could convert that to a computer readable format. So during this project, at a time when I dearly needed some authentic footage of a flood around the Inverell district, this was a godsend. Although the footage was shot on a primitive handycam by today's standards, and it was fairly low resolution, I think it fits well in the video. I needed to enlarge it to fit across the video screen for today's standards, which makes it look fairly grainy, but I think that adds to its authenticity. When I was a young person growing up in Inverell and becoming interested in photography, there was a gentleman by the name of George Devine who owned a photographic studio and a shop selling cameras and darkroom chemicals and papers, and I used to be a customer of George Devine's. Well, in 1955, George Devine took a photograph of the famous 55 flood at the corner of Byron Street and Campbell Street in Inverell. And it shows people standing around the edges of the floodwaters as it raced down the main street of Inverell. I obtained a copy of that photograph, and I've created a small animation to make the water actually move in that photograph to close out the video. And I think it's a wonderful way to end the video with one of George Devine's fantastic photographs of Inverell. Ray and Edna Mepham had 2 daughters and a son, and their son Kevin, who's only a few years younger than me, was tragically killed in a farm accident in 2015. Kevin was a friend of mine, and I can remember many wonderful days fishing in the McIntyre Gorge with Kevin and his dad Ray for Murray cod. And I wanted to pay tribute to Kevin. So when the song finishes, a photograph of Kevin appears with him doing one of his favourite things, fishing for Murray cod in the McIntyre Gorge. I thought that it would be nice to end the video on a lighter note, if I could. And the opportunity came up when I was visiting a friend, Michael O'Sullivan, in Inverell. Michael was down the back of Coles supermarket busking, as he frequently does, and I was down there with my camera getting some video of Michael. Kevin, when do you think it's going to rain again?
Well, I might have to get out and do the rain dance. Get my little grandson here.
Ron, when do you think it'll rain again?
Oh, I think you got more chance of winning lotto.
A man came out of the supermarket, and this was Brian Cum, a former employee of the Hong Nguyen family business in Inverell. And Michael grabbed Brian. He said, "Brian, come over here and sit down in this chair. Rob needs you to tell a story about the 1976 flood. What have you got for us?" It was a story I'd heard before, but it was wonderful to hear it from Brian himself. It's a note, however, that is slightly embarrassing for the Inverell Shire Council, I suppose, and I well knew of this event before Brian told me. And I thought it was just a wonderful way to finish off our video.
And got rid of the water. It took about 3 years to get rid of the smell. That was my story about the flood.
You can hear Brian's story in the official music video for Big Water that launches tomorrow. This concludes the series of videos I've produced to tell the stories behind the first song that I've ever written. When I retired about 5 years ago, I predicted that the next decade would be the most creative of my life. If you're retired and there's something that you've always wanted to learn to do, then get stuck into it. You'll never have more time available to do it than you do right now. You'll never have more time available than the time you have left. So learn it, do it, express it, live it. What's my next project? That's easy. A good lie down.